Hey friends, Matt aka Martin here, and a little while ago I did a video going over everything there is to know about automation inside of Ableton Live, and in this video I want to go through everything there is to know about modulation. Now, modulation can mean many different things, but in this context I'm talking specifically about clip modulation, which behaves very similar to automation. First up, what is modulation? Well, modulation is basically the ability to automatically move any parameter inside of Ableton Live relative to its actual or absolute position. This is opposed to automation, which sets the actual or absolute position of that parameter over time. Another thing that makes modulation different from automation is that modulation can only be applied within clips, whether we're in session view or arrangement view, whereas automation can be applied in only clips in session view and directly on the timeline in arrangement view. To make this a little bit easier to understand, I'm going to show you a quick example. So here I have two copies of a clip, which is a synth playing a chord progression. We have on both of these clips the filter being automated to open up over the course of this 4 bars, but in the first clip, this filter is unmodulated, and in the second clip, we have some modulation applied to this filter to have it move up and down every bar or so. So here's our unmodulated but automated version. And here is our automated and modulated version. So you would have seen there that even though the automation stayed exactly the same, in the second clip, that auto filter was moving up and down, whereas in the first clip, it was just staying absolutely set based on its automated position. So because modulation is tied to a clip, it behaves pretty much exactly the same in session view as it does in arrangement view, except for some slight visual differences. Because of this, we'll start and go over modulation in arrangement view, and then quickly go over how it differs in session view. So to access modulation for a parameter in arrangement view, first we have to have a clip selected. So say for example, I want to modulate this filter frequency cutoff position on this auto filter. I have to first select the clip that I want to apply the modulation in, and then right click on the filter frequency control and go to show modulation. If I don't have the clip selected, let's just unselect this clip and go back to our device view. If I right click on the parameter I want to automate, you'll see that show modulation is grayed out. So we need to have a clip selected in order to actually apply modulation using this technique. You can also access modulation from directly within the clip itself, but we'll talk about that later on. So again, let's select this clip, right click our filter frequency control and click on show modulation. So now we've gone into the clip in arrangement view, and we can immediately see this dotted blue line in the center of our clip. And this brings us to the first visual difference between modulation and automation, which is that any automation envelope is going to be red, whereas any modulation envelope is going to be blue. Now, this is particularly helpful to know in session view, because in session view, we see both modulation and automation envelopes inside of a single clip, whereas obviously in arrangement view, we can only see modulation information. You can adjust and edit a modulation envelope in exactly the same way that you can adjust and edit an automation envelope. All the same editing techniques apply, so if you haven't seen my video on automation editing, make sure to check out that video right here with the card above and come back to this video then. So let's apply some simple modulation. I'm going to select this whole area, right click and insert a sine wave shape, and then duplicate this sine wave 4 times. So we have our modulation going up and down and up and down and up and down over the course of this 4 bars. And now as we play this clip, the modulation will move relative to the position that it's set to on the actual device. What this means is that we can continue to adjust the parameter and hear the effects of the modulation relative to the parameter's actual position. So I'm going to loop this clip. We'll go back to our device view, and as I play this clip, take a look at the filter frequency control here. What you'll see is a visual indication of the modulation being applied to this filter frequency parameter. This visual identification is seen by the blue line and the black line not lining up with the actual position of the filter frequency control. And as I move this filter frequency control, which is being modulated, you'll also hear the difference in the modulation. Now, it's worth noting at this point that only parameters with continuously variable values can be modulated, and any parameters with discrete values, such as, for example, the filter type here, or the filter slope, or this drop-down menu, cannot be modulated, but they can be automated. You'll see that if I try to apply modulation to any of these discrete values, it doesn't show up as an option. We only get the option to apply automation. So let's go back to our clip and look at the modulation that we've applied. As mentioned, we can edit this modulation in any of the same ways that we can edit our automation. Except if we take a look at the maximum and minimum values here, our maximum value is set to plus 50% and our minimum value is set to minus 50%. This tells us that when the modulation is all the way at the top, we're increasing that parameter by 50% of the total range of that parameter. And likewise, if we're at the bottom, we're decreasing it by 50% of the total range of that parameter. But what's interesting about this is that different parameters actually have different modulation ranges. For example, let's go to the modulation of a different parameter, which we can do by going to the Envelopes tab in the left and selecting which envelope we'd like to view. Let's stay on our auto filter and select a different control like resonance. Now, I'll mention this again, but it's worth noting that in arrangement view, you can only see modulation inside of clips, whereas in session view, you can see both modulation and automation. But again, we'll cover that in a bit. So now with our resonance control, you can see that our dotted blue line actually starts all the way at the top. And if I hover over it, we can see that the value of this is 100%. And if I drag this all the way down to the bottom, the value is 0%. What this means is that when the modulation line is set all the way to the top, the parameter is set to its actual absolute value that's been set, whereas when it's all the way down at the bottom, it's set to its minimum possible value. Now, for the most part, there isn't really any rhyme or reason that I could figure out as to what parameters have a value range of plus 50 to minus 50% and what parameters have a value range of 100 to 0%. But if you're applying modulation, it's worth taking note of the range of that parameter you're applying modulation to, because it will behave differently depending on what the range is. As you've probably guessed by now, modulation and automation can be used in conjunction with one another to create really interesting movement of parameters over time. The reason this works is because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, automation is used to set the absolute value of a parameter at a certain point in time, whereas modulation is used to change the relative position of that particular parameter. So in my clip here, if I go back to the auto filter frequency modulation, we can see that this filter frequency is being modulated up and down as we heard before. Now let's go back into our device view and let's automate that filter frequency parameter to increase over the course of this 4 bars. I'm going to right click that filter frequency parameter, show the automation in a new lane, and then select the entirety of this range, right click and select my increasing sawtooth option. And now as we play this clip, that filter frequency parameter is being automated to increase over time. So its absolute value is increasing, whereas its relative value, which is the value we're actually kind of hearing output, is moving up and down relative to the position set by the automation. As you can tell, this opens up some really awesome creative possibilities as it allows us to effectively automate or move already automated parameters. As a side note here, you can also apply modulation to any parameters that are being controlled by macros in a rack or by a Max for Live device such as LFO or Shaper. This can also open up some really cool and creative possibilities because it means that you still retain some control over a parameter that's actually being controlled elsewhere. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new. I post videos like this every single week. And if you're really enjoying my content, why not consider heading over to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can support me by buying me a coffee, downloading some Ableton Live racks and sample packs, or becoming a member and supporting me on a monthly basis and getting a bunch of cool perks as well. There's a link in the description. So when working with modulation in session view, it works pretty much exactly the same way, except for the big key difference, which is that both automation and modulation information are stored within the same clip. We can access the modulation of a parameter in session view the same as we can in arrangement view by selecting the clip, except the key difference here is that the clip has to be playing in order for us to actually apply modulation inside of that clip. So let's play the clip that we want to apply modulation to. And now we can right click on the control that we want to apply modulation to, which is our filter frequency control. Right click and click on show modulation, and that will open up the modulation envelope inside of the currently playing clip. If our clip is not playing, so if I stop this clip from playing and right click the parameter we want to automate, you'll see that we don't get either the ability to modulate or automate that parameter. So we have to make sure the clip is playing. From here, we can edit the modulation envelope. So like we did before, we can select this area, right click, insert a sine wave, and then duplicate this 3 times. And from here, we can actually switch between automation and modulation of that same parameter by going over to our envelopes view in our clip and selecting either automation or modulation. You'll see that if a parameter is modulated, it has a blue dot next to it. And if a parameter is automated, so let's automate this auto filter control once again, right click, increase with a sawtooth wave, you'll see both a red and a blue dot appear next to that parameter, and of course the device that's being automated as well. And of course, like with automation and modulation in arrangement view, we can also select which parameter we want to automate or modulate from a drop-down menu and just selecting either modulation or automation. Similarly to working with automation in a clip in session view, we can have our modulation either linked or unlinked to the clip's length and loop settings. By doing this, we can create modulation envelopes of different lengths, not only to the clips, but actually to other envelopes, which opens up some more cool creative possibilities. As an example, let's go back to our filter frequency control, select modulation, and now go to this linked option here and click on unlinked. We can now make this particular envelope only last for 1 bar and loop that single bar. And then we could go to our resonance control, go to our modulation, unlink this resonance control and have this resonance control's modulation last for 2 bars. And let's select this range and apply some sort of a triangle wave shape. So now we have our auto filter's frequency control being automated over the course of 4 bars, modulated in a 1 bar loop, and then the resonance control being modulated in a 2 bar loop, which we can see if we look at the controls on the actual auto filter. Because modulation is tied to clips in both session view and arrangement view, it's worth noting that linking and unlinking modulation works in both session view and arrangement view as well. And so there is pretty much everything you need to know about modulation inside of Ableton Live and how it differs from automation. If you haven't checked out my video all about automation, make sure to check it out here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you all in the next video.